Welcome everyone to our fourth Community Advisory Committee meeting. I'm Bart Schwartz, and we'll be introducing all the CAC members present to you later in the program. I'd also like to welcome those who are joining through the YouTube or by phone. Thank you for participating. We received very good positive feedback from residents and others about the format that we're using, and that's why we're going to continue to use the same format, having the working meeting and streaming that, and then having community meetings that supplement the working meetings. The next community meeting, we just were able to make the final arrangements in time for today. We had a meeting in Staten Island on November 12th at the West Brighton Community Center. That went very well. And our next meeting is going to be in Queens at the Queensbridge houses on January 9th. And information about that will be available on our website. Then after Queens will be the Bronx, so we'll have been in every borough. I'm also actually very excited to tell you that as of today, the monitor team has visited every single development. And these visits are extraordinarily worthwhile, where we get to talk to everyone. And I'm not saying I visited everyone, but it's the team, and it really is a team effort. We really hear so much when we're talking to people on the ground as to how things are going, what the major problems are, what may be some of the patterns that are developing. And we'll continue. We won't stop because we have visited every development. We will continue to do that. It's really critical to the success of the monitorship to stay in touch with the residents. We've done it from the beginning, and we'll continue to do that. I'm going to go into some more detail later on, particularly to talk about the second report that we issued, give you some of the highlights of that and some related materials. But now I'm going to turn it over to Asha Muldrow, who you all know, who has served as our leader on these committee meetings. Asha.
Thank you, Bart. Well, again, based on the positive feedback that we received from the last meeting that we hosted in this format, we're going to continue that tonight. And I'm going to first turn it back over to Bart to get an update from the monitor. And then I will turn it to our HUD Regional Administrator, Lynn Patton, who will give an update. And then we have presentations from CAC members who've been working on various issues. We'll start with United Neighborhood Houses Policy Analyst J.T. Falcone, who will talk about the community centers. And Resident Association President Tamika Williams will talk about construction. Resident Association President Joel Gross will talk about leases and resident rights. And Resident Association President Robert Hall, development and consolidation. And then we will have NYPD Housing Chief, let me make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, Capote, will talk about neighborhood safety. And we will hopefully hear from Sherrod from HUD Office of Prevention, Recovery, and Transformation, who will talk about HUD 964 regulations. And then during all of these discussions, we're opening it up to questions and comments as we go along so that it's an open dialogue. And afterwards, we'll turn it back over to some of our committee members who talked last time so they can continue updating us on any of your issues and telling us where you are on things. So with that, we will have hopefully a very fruitful discussion, and then we'll have Bart close us out. So I'll turn it back over to you, Bart.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Asha. 2 points I want to raise from the last meeting we had. We had a good discussion about the action plan over the funds that are being made available through the state and through the governor's office. And anything you want to read about that is posted on our website, which is nightmonitor.com. And I think we prepared a FAQ section on that particular plan, so you can read that. At least I know I wrote one. I think it made it to the website. And the other thing that I mentioned at the last meeting, and I continue to seek your help with this, it relates to security and it relates to lighting. We've heard over the past our visits that lighting is an issue. It's obviously a security issue. So we need to hear from the developments and present that to NYCHA rather than do it one at a time when it seems like less of a problem when it's one at a time. We want to put it all together. So again, you could call us, you can write us, you can do it through the resident association presidents. You could go to the website. Anyway, just get us enough information so that we can pass it along. So let me turn to the report that we issued in November, which covered a period through October. We released it on November 1st, and it covered a period through October. There actually, we stretched a little bit with the report and went over the date a little bit because there had been some accomplishments, and we wanted the report to reflect the real world, and why leave out the accomplishments. So the report covers a period a little bit longer than it might have been, but that's to give everybody a better picture of what's going on. So at the outset, one of the things I said in the report is that we have a very good working relationship with the new chair who started in August, Gregory Russ, and he continues to build his team, and we work very well with his team at NYCHA, and we work very well with Deputy Mayor Vicky Bean's team at City Hall. So it's a good, solid working relationship. We're not going to agree on everything. In fact, we don't agree on everything, but we're really comfortable that we're all headed in the same direction, and we're all using acting in good faith to achieve the results of the agreement and even more. There've been some more action plans since we last met. One is the PHAS action plan. Just a few words about that. You all may recall that one of the problems with NYCHA is that they intentionally try to deceive HUD when FAS inspections were taking place, and there are lots of stories documented. I don't want to live in the past. We all know it was the wrong thing, and it's very, very poor conduct. The FAS action plan is directed at making sure that things like that don't happen again, that there's proper training, there's instruction, there's control, and there are audit trails, and it will be done professionally. And I would say that in the last month, I think it is, even since the last report, there were some disciplinary proceedings taken against employees at NYCHA who did not follow the rules. And I was surprised. There were some people who read that as a bad thing, but the fact is I read that as a good thing. That shows that NYCHA is moving toward accountability, and accountability is one of the biggest, or lack of accountability, is one of the biggest problems that NYCHA faces. So having disciplinary proceedings and taking disciplinary steps, I really believe are a step in the right direction, not something that should be a concern. The three departments that were set up, which are environmental, compliance, and quality assurance, are all working well together. They each have a role, but there were some areas where there is an overlap in their responsibility, or at least there could be, and they are working very well together to ensure that they each are covering the areas that they should, and where there may be an overlap, deciding who should cover it rather than duplicating efforts. So I think that's very positive. The let's see. Oh, I know what I wanted to talk about next, and that is the organizational plan. The agreement required that the city engage a management consultant to prepare an organizational plan for the monitor and NYCHA to then make decisions about how NYCHA is organized, where there may be need for a change. And I think there's going to be a lot of room for misunderstanding about this. KPG was appointed as the management consultant, and I'm concerned that there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding about the KPMG report when it comes out and is public, which should be later this month, when it will be out. And the reason I'm concerned is because I'm afraid that people will think it is a directive to do certain things, or it is telling us what needs and must be done. But that's not the purpose of what they're doing. The agreement between HUD, the Southern District, the city, and NYCHA required us to engage this third-party consultant to review systems, policies, and procedures and recommend improvements. Immediately after I was appointed in March, actually the last day of February, but in March, I established a team to work with the New York City Law Department and NYCHA to monitor the scoping, interviews, and procurement of a qualified and well-resourced management consultant. As a result of that evaluation, the city selected KPMG together with the Bronner Group as the management consultants. And they are to conduct an as-is evaluation of NYCHA. In other words, a review of NYCHA as it currently operates. Because if we don't know how it currently operates, it'll be more difficult to understand where the issues are, where the problems are, and where the changes are needed. So that current operation is a required first step. The successful future planning requires a thorough understanding of that current state of the organization, and the scope of the work established for the management consultant was intended to obtain a broad, large-scale overview of NYCHA's operations from the highest level by creating a snapshot of the existing operations. I really want to emphasize that. The report, which will be delivered later this month, is not a report on how NYCHA should be organized, nor is it the organizational plan which is referred to in the agreement. Rather, it provides preliminary information required to help the new chair, CEO, identify the organizational goals, hurdles, and priorities for the future of NYCHA. The organizational plan in the January 31st agreement is intended to and required to be more than just a chart with the same boxes but different names. It is an organizational plan contemplates significantly more consideration by NYCHA, the monitor, and the management consultant. And I want to give you an example. Analysis of NYCHA's mission and the new CEO's future vision, the residents' expectations from interviewing and discussing it with residents in the short and long term, and how employees are empowered to deliver necessary services and held accountable to do so, and how assets are maintained and managed. The organizational plan contemplated in the agreement calls for that kind of sustained oversight. It is not, and that's what we will be focused on. I know it's for short, people keep talking about this organizational plan, and it sounds as if something's going to be delivered, which is a final product. It's a starting point, but a very important and well-informed starting point. And then I think the last thing that I do want to address, and I may come back to some other issues later on, but I do want to talk a little bit about the budget, which was finally submitted earlier this month, and hopefully is going to be approved in the next week or a couple of weeks. I want everyone to understand that NYCHA is not paying the budget. The City of New York is paying the budget. They're doing it through the law department, and no single resident, apartment, or anyone in NYCHA will get any less service because of the cost of the monitorship. The city approved the budget. HUD approved the budget. The Southern District reviewed the budget. Prior consultants, we've looked at prior consultants' reports. Those were charged to NYCHA, unlike our budget. We've reduced our fees, and the last thing I'll say about it, just on a personal note, at least one newspaper implied that the money was going to me. Believe me, it is not. It is going to the companies involved, and my company, Guidepost Solutions, is probably a little more than half of the total budget. We have all the experts on elevators, the boilers, every issue that we need help. They are also included in the budget, and we have to put in a new budget every year. We have to again be held accountable. So I just wanted to at least get that on the table so that I had a chance to speak to everyone. And then, Asha, I think I'd like to just continue to participate as we go along, as we did last time. Perfect. But I don't want to go over the same action plans and the same subjects for each meeting. I think the time is too valuable, and I want to take it away from the CAC members.
Excellent.
Thank
you, Bart. And now we will hear from HUD Regional Administrator Lynn Patton, please.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you, Bart. I'm going to keep my update relatively short, but because my public NYCHA sort of persona has been on the down low lately, with the exception of I attended at the invitation of Tamika Williams-Moore a tenant association meeting at Pominick Houses in Queens last week, which was great. Went very well. But my private NYCHA presence has been strong because we've been having a lot of great meetings with Eva, her team, Greg, yourself, the monitor. My leadership at HUD has come in, and I think it's important to share with everyone that because of the severity and importance of this agreement, Assistant Secretary Hunter Kurtz will now be coming into New York City once a month to have high-level meetings with SDNY, NYCHA, and the monitors team, which I think are critical to have in person, face-to-face. We can have tons of productive conference calls, but sitting in a room with somebody for several hours with various team members, I think it really drives the message home, first of all, to the residents of how important this is to everybody at HUD as well, especially the secretary. Really to just piggyback on what Bart said, we've been having extremely productive meetings about all of the 5 action plans on heat, lead, obviously pets, mold, and elevators. I obviously defer to the subject matter experts on that, but we have, in conjunction with Sherrod, who's been invaluable, been obviously putting in our 2 cents where we think it's needed to make sure that, of course, all of these are meeting HUD rules and regulations. And speaking of rules and regulations, one of the things that we've all been working on as a team is trying to figure out what role can HUD play in terms of sort of encouraging and fostering sort of the recovery efforts that we're all undertaking. And honestly, one of the best ways is through a lot of our federal powers when it comes to waivers. So one of the things that we're proud to announce is that we have waived all federal regulations as it pertains to the money that the governor has given to the city. And while they still have to adhere to state regulations, hopefully this will help speed up the procurement process when it comes to acquiring boilers and large ticket capital need items. And Bart and myself and Sherrod and leadership are working to identify other areas where we can make as equal an impact. I know Bart talked about the FOS action plan. One of the things that I know we're working on, first of all, is a complete overhaul of how HUD does physical inspection process, not just with public housing authorities, but also with multifamily private landlords. For example, with public housing, HUD used to take a sampling of NYCHA properties. We couldn't inspect all 2,600 properties, so we would take a sampling of that and then determine NYCHA's overall score based on that. That's no longer happening. NYCHA used to get points based on the age of the building, the occupancy of the building, the credit score, the timeliness of which they collected rent. While these are all great, I don't think it's something that reflects the condition of the building and shouldn't be counted towards a score. So leadership is really taking a lot of these into consideration, and through training and accountability and communication, we're going to ensure that change takes root. And I agree with what Bart said. There was a city article about how, you know, the deception is ongoing. But I tweeted out even that, you know, the headline would have been better served if it said NYCHA busts NYCHA, because it was the leadership at NYCHA that discovered that these employees were still being deceptive in their work. And that's not necessarily something, actually it's not something that would have happened before. Before, on NYCHA's homepage, it was encouraged to be deceptive. And so what we're seeing here is really a 180 with respect to leadership, and Greg and his team and Eva have been doing a great job. And first of all, making sure that new leadership is appointed through obviously the permission and joint sort of opinions of the monitor and SDNY and HUD, and also making sure that leadership is competent, driven, dedicated, and effective. Those are things that are desperately needed, first of all, in any agency, but least of all, NYCHA. So I'm actually really excited when residents stop me and ask what's happening, what's been going on, because for the first time I feel like I can look them in the eye and say the change is really going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's finally going to happen. And within the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a physical difference, you're going to see just an emotional difference, and you're going to see real lives changed and improved for the better. I spoke today actually to Vicki Bean about a lot of the joint priorities we all have. Because of my stay in NYCHA, everybody I think at this table knows that one of my biggest priorities is hiring. I saw far too often how understaffed in the field most of these properties are. I don't have to tell the TA presidents here at this table. You know, when you have three janitors, or caretakers as they call them, overseeing 19 individual residential towers, the best janitor in the world can't keep up with that. And I think it's important to note that so many of the workers at NYCHA are great, and they want to do better, and they want to better serve their residents. And all the maintenance teams I met with in the places I lived were desperate to be able to better serve and clean and provide for the residents that they work alongside. And so we're all working together to make sure that they have not only the tools they need, whether that be an extra snow blower or a compactor, or even the tiniest things, but also the bodies. They need bodies, both skilled and unskilled, so that we can really start to see on a daily basis on the ground. Because one of the things that SDNY and I hammer home, and the monitor as well, also to Greg and his team, as hard as everybody in this room is working, and as hard as the BART's monitor team is working, and our HUD team and Sherrod is working, and SDNY, since January 30th, a year ago almost, to the day when we signed and announced this agreement, the physical change on the ground for the residents has not necessarily improved that much. I think we're seeing already an improvement in heat. Those outages are dealt with quickly, and maybe Eva can speak to the stats on that later. They're very impressive. But, we want to make sure that residents are seeing and experiencing on the ground the change and the excitement that we're seeing in our meetings. And, when that means there are more janitors on the ground, that means that your lobby is not going to smell the way that you're used to it smelling, and that maybe there'll be less garbage, which means there's less pests, which means the obviously the property is healthier, where there's less lead dust and less discolored water. These are things that are exigent health and safety issues that cannot be tolerated, and we're all working together to make sure that those changes happen. Thank you.
I would just like to thank you, and I endorse everything that you said. And from the beginning, we have said the test for success of the monitorship and the agreement is delivering the services to the residents. You can have the best working agency in the world, but if the services aren't getting delivered, we will not have succeeded. And
Yes.
that's the goal and the direction of that agreement.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you, Asha.
Okay, next, I would like to turn to United Neighborhood Houses Policy Analyst, J.T. Falcone, please.
Great, thanks, Asha. United Neighborhood Houses is the membership organization for settlement houses in New York City. So we have 40 members in New York City, 2 upstate. Settlement houses from the beginning, the founding of NYCHA, have been deeply committed to the model of public housing and deeply committed to the idea of integrating social services into public housing developments. So much so that our founder, Mary Simkovich, founder of Greenwich House and United Neighborhood Houses, was on the original board of NYCHA as an advisor. And our history has been intertwined ever since. There are instances of our members selling property to the Housing Authority in order to develop and then moving in afterwards. And today we have 24 members that are offering well over 200 different programs in over 100 different sites in public housing. So as a result, we've been deeply, deeply concerned with public housing's future and making sure that that is a future that, as we envision public housing that is lead-free, mold-free, vermin-free, and functioning really, really well and properly, continues to integrate those social services and have them on site as valuable offering to communities. So we have approached this work in a few different ways because there are a few high-level issues that are faced by community center operators. And sort of bucketing them, there are tremendous funding challenges, not only for capital need for repairs to roofs and repairs to floors and HVAC systems, but also there's day-to-day maintenance funding that needs to be brought into these centers so that they can continue to operate as effectively as possible. I think there's been a lot of different ways that over time community center operators have taken on more and more of these day-to-day maintenance tasks without necessarily having the money put in their budgets to reflect the cost of doing that. So in addition to the capital need, which according to NYCHA's physical needs assessment from 2017 is about $500 million in capital need for community centers across the portfolio, there is this maintenance funding that's missing from the budgets of the social service operators. And so we've been working, we conducted a survey last year, and we're updating those numbers this year to get a sense of what those real costs are for the nonprofits, to better understand what kind of funding we're talking about. I mean, it sounds little, but it adds up fast, right? When you're responsible for the light bulbs, for the painting, for the light plumbing, for the light electrical, things add up very quickly, and the little things that our members have done more and more over time to keep the doors open have become insurmountable costs that are really, really challenging for them, and they've been taking them on. So we're conducting that survey. We want to get real numbers that we can put on a page and sort of say, this is what the nonprofits are spending in maintenance costs day to day. And then in addition to that, we've been working with partners at DYCD, partners at DFTA, partners in the mayor's office, and partners at NYCHA to think about some of the systems and communication that have also exacerbated the challenges, right? Because money is one thing, but for the limited amount of money that we have, how do we make sure that it's spent as efficiently as possible? So a few months back, we had NYCHA's resident engagement team at our offices conducting a focus group, because one of the things that we've noticed is that the system that's used when you are reporting a repair that you need to be made is not designed with nonprofit operators in mind, right? It's designed with residents in mind, but there are different unique needs for nonprofits that need to be accounted for. And so thinking about, as that system is being redesigned, how it can be redesigned to also accommodate those needs and have maybe a separate category that can sort of flag that there are unique situations that are faced by this nonprofit. Thinking really about who's responsible for what, right? So as NYCHA has increasingly faced budget challenges, it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to be coming in for every minor repair that's happening in a community center. But if we're going to ask the nonprofits to take that on, how do we find a way to make sure that that's reflected in their budget and that they're trained to do so, and that the repairs that they're doing are up to code and are going to work for the buildings, right? Especially for those centers that are located in residential buildings, because you have the standalone community centers, that's one thing, and then you have community centers that are in the basement, they have apartments above, and you certainly don't want them tinkering with the HVAC at that point, right? So thinking about the ways that they can keep their own centers up and running, and a big part of that has also been the result of some citations and fines that our members and other nonprofits have faced. So one of the big topic areas that I'm hoping to dig in here with all the partners at the table is thinking about how we can find ways to divert fines and citations from community centers, because everyone from FDNY to DOB to, in some cases, the contracting agency will come in and cite members of ours, nonprofits, community center operators, for violations that, at least as of right now, are technically NYCHA's responsibility to repair. So we've been thinking about getting on paper clearly who's responsible for what category, so that from there we can move forward and start to think about how we can divert those fines that are technically not within the responsibility of the nonprofit. And then we've also been working closely with partners at NYCHA to sort of think about a repair request escalation procedure, because right now what happens is a nonprofit will write in or call into NYCHA, they'll get a work ticket number, and then they will, if they haven't gotten the repair that they need within a couple of days, they'll send out what I call the blitzkrieg email, which is every email address that they have at NYCHA, every email address that they have at DFTA or DYCD, and every email address that they have of an elected official who's ever been somewhat responsive about the issue. And while that has actually gotten issues to move, it's not the most efficient use of anyone's time. So trying to think about how we can actually create an escalation procedure so that by the time someone's getting an email to alert them to an issue, it's because it's actually at the appropriate level, and that's the person that should be getting that email. So that's involved NYCHA sharing the RAM chart information for the regional asset managers across the portfolio, and us getting that out to our members to sort of say, hey, listen, if your property manager isn't able to make the repair in 3 to 5 business days, at that point, that's when you're going to escalate it to the RAM. And then from there, if there's still a challenge, that's when you would loop in a director, right? So it's little things, it's sort of wading through the waters together, but it's looking at the areas where we can actually make the most efficient use of funds so that we're not taking the limited amount of money that is available for these centers and sort of wasting it on all of these blitzkrieg emails and all of the different ways that people can get lost down a rabbit hole of trying to get something addressed when it's floundering. And then the other big thing that I have been hearing about since joining the CAC, and I've heard from the Federal Monitors team based on outreach that you've done. I know, Bart, you mentioned visiting all of the developments earlier. So through that, I know that there's been some feedback that residents, so the users of these community centers, have challenges with accessing them at times after hours, and have challenges with some of the ways that programs are designed to serve single age groups. So really interested to think with partners around the table about how we might get creative around those solutions, particularly because settlement houses, UNH's members, are deeply committed not only to communities but also to intergenerational approaches and finding ways that programs can feed into each other and generations can learn from and benefit each other. So very curious to have those conversations and looking forward to that work.
Yeah, Mike, one of the points you made really came home to roost this summer in the Jackie Robinson houses and the child center there. And one of the key issues there was nobody knew who was in charge of repairs and maintenance and taking care of the property. So it wasn't taken care of, and then nobody knew what to do when it became an emergency. So I know that aspect of the issue, which is who is responsible, that NYCHA turned to that during the summer, and is working it out and making its best effort to work that out, and we're helping where we can. But if you run into difficulties on that particular issue, for sure, around this table is the place to let us know, so we can help you with it. We'll help you with the others as well, but that one I should have been started with MOUs saying who's responsible for what.
Yeah, so going back to March of this year, I believe, Interim Chair Garcia at the time was on record at a city council hearing saying that there was a master agreement that was being negotiated for these spaces that would in some way maybe categorize who's responsible for what. Really interested to see the status of those conversations and sort of how we can plug in. I know one of the big reasons that we are doing this survey and making sure that we get the real numbers from our members on what the costs actually are is we want to make sure that those conversations are had very much with those numbers in mind so that we can think forward and ensure that any agreement is struck is real and reflective of what's actually happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, JT. And I also appreciate that you've been in touch with other members around the table, so I wanted to invite anyone to weigh in on this important issue if you'd like.
But I also would say that the way this committee works is that we don't necessarily inform each other what's going to be raised at a meeting. So it's not always the case where the members will come prepared for a particular issue. If they have something to add, they can be helpful. That's great. But one of the purposes of these meetings is to make sure the issue gets communicated to whomever might be helpful. So, not putting this City Hall on the spot. Let's hear from City Hall.
Is my microphone on?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, JT, for bringing up those issues. And I was going to save this for my own place on the agenda, but I could just discuss it now. So community centers and the difficulties that NYCHA residents, service providers, other city agencies are facing with the really challenging conditions that these centers are in is one of the deputy mayor's top priorities. We've done some site visits. She's really, this has been something that has really come to the forefront of what we've been focusing on. And there's kind of two aspects to it. I want to talk about first the MOU, the agreement. So I became involved with those discussions a few months ago, I guess, at this point, and we in the city are undertaking a similar exercise in determining what the actual costs out of these maintenance obligations are, looking at what NYCHA has spent, looking at what DYCD and DFTA have spent in order to do an actual realistic cost out of what these things actually cost. And we feel that we're not really able to move forward until we know what universe we're talking about. And we've been working with UNH to get some of their information to help inform that analysis. So we are getting that information together, working with OMB to validate some of that information. And from there, I think is where we're going to go and determine the best structure. And we're still debating what the best structure moving forward would be, whether it's through another city agency managing some of the stuff, whether it is through agreements with providers or through other city agencies. But we're working out what the best structure for that is in order to address those short-term needs. And that includes identifying very clearly what belongs to who. And sometimes it's not going to be very clear because in many instances there are issues that are interrelated, especially with the facilities that are within a larger development or a building that has many capital issues. So there are challenges that we're going to have to address once they come up, and I think it all gets back to the larger issue of these buildings and these community centers have large capital needs. And that turns then to the second prong of what we've been turning our focus to is the larger capital needs and a permanent fix for these community centers. And we've been working with UNH, we've been talking with other city agencies, working closely with NYCHA on this to figure out, there's not going to be one solution for everything, but to figure out solutions to address the largest number of community centers that we can. And that is a work in progress. It is something, though, that is of a personal priority for myself. It's also one of the deputy mayors. So it is something that we recognize. It's something that does not have an easy solution. And we are in the process of working through some of those issues, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to have some good news on progress, maybe at the next CAC meeting. I can't promise anything, but we at least will have an update. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on that, but that's basically where we are at this point.
Can you prioritize certain types of community centers? Let's take those that are for children for the summer. There's only an 8-week period when either you've got it solved or you don't.
So we've been thinking a lot about creating a pipeline and prioritizing different sites. And there are the standalone sites, which are perhaps easier to address because they aren't connected to larger building systems. Then it depends on which operator runs which facility and what resources that operator has. And then it also is whether it's a DOE program, because those have very special and specific requirements, or whether it's a senior program. And so there are a number of different factors that we're trying to put together to create some kind of prioritization based on a number of factors, including what type of service it is and how, during the day, how many hours is it used, and how many different providers and residents use that particular facility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you for jumping in, Haley Stein from the mayor's office. We appreciate that perspective as well, and that you're all working together, which is so important. Would anyone else like to weigh in on that issue before we move on? Okay, great. One of the things, though, I did want to highlight, though, and perhaps it's low-hanging fruit in what you were saying, JT, is calling into the CCC and having them be attuned to the unique issues of the community centers. So maybe, a drop-down menu or something like that that can flag that it's not a resident calling in, but that it's a center that has, 40 children in freezing conditions, is the kind of thing that we can maybe make some recommendations around.
And just to add to that, NYCHA came to UNH and conducted a really amazing focus group with our members about what that system would need and what the unique needs are. And so we have all of that information.
Oh, good.
It was really a great time.
Excellent. And now we'll actually go back to the top of the presentations. Sherrod, would you please present on HUD 964 regulations? I know you're starting to work on that and putting together some good meetings this week.
Yep. Am I on?
Yes.
You are.
Good. All right. So, hey, everybody. How y'all doing? So, this week, we will have 2 meetings, actually. One with the CCOP, and it was on Thursday, and I'm expecting that meeting to be very lively. And then we have a working group meeting on that Thursday afternoon. We have 7 proposed training topics that I'm going to discuss with the group, the working group, so that I can make sure that we're on the same page before I present it to Russ at NYCHA, to see what his ideas are and see what his timeline, because he has a plan that he's working on as well, and we want to be complementary toward that plan. So that's the main update that we have under the 964. I actually was at Ingersoll Houses, and I was actually doing the nighttime visit to check the lights, and also under the agreement, the waste removal. So the part that I did get to see was great. But then I had to peel off and come to the meeting. So that's what I was working on, so I do apologize. But for the 964, we actually, Bart, I don't know if you mentioned the presidents that we spoke with.
No.
So we met with 5 presidents over the, what would that be, the Baruch Houses side of the NYCHA? It was like
Yeah.
5 in that whole area.
Yeah.
And we got some good ideas, some good topics, some concerns. NYCHA followed up on a couple of concerns for us. But overall, they added more depth to the topics and training that we're going to go through. I guess I should mention the topics. That would make sense.
Yeah, while you that meeting that we had with the 5 presidents was very helpful, because it helped us better understand where the training might be focused, and how they could achieve some of the results they want if they just approached it differently. So,
So the topics that we're proposing, we're going to talk about the NYCHA responsibilities under 24 CFR 964. That's one topic. Then the responsibilities under 964. The first set is NYCHA's responsibilities, but right under NYCHA is the Tenant Association responsibilities, all the presidents. The CCOP's responsibilities, because there's everybody from the complaints that we've been getting, it seems is that everybody points at NYCHA. NYCHA's not doing their job, but when I ask fundamental questions, okay, tell me, how did you arrive to this complaint? Is it something that you as the president wanted, or is it something that your residents wanted? And a few of the members could not point back to their residents wanting a particular item. So that was one of the things that really showed up. So that responsibility section is going to be huge. And the relationship between those 3 agencies, specifically the relationship between NYCHA and the CCOP and the tenant associations and their management, because some of the associations have this view of some things that they may want that they translate into a right. And I've had to hurt a couple of people's feelings to let them know that that's not a right, that is a want. The regulations are very specific on what your rights are, and then you derive your wants from something else. But then when I asked them, again, how did they come up with that want? I said, did you have a meeting, and did you vote on this want? The couple of presidents that I talked to couldn't go backwards to that meeting. So if we were to audit them and say, hey, how did you come up to spend money on X? You can't show me where your residents said that this is what you all need. It'll be a question. So that's one of the relationship things that we're going to talk about. Then obviously the bylaws, to make sure that a lot of the association bylaws are up to snuff under the regulations, and let NYCHA know that they don't have to burden themselves down with doing a couple of practices that they have, which is just tedious on their end. They can free themselves up. And finally, the fire topic of it all is the tenant participation fund. How a association should be able to calculate their own tenant participation funds and understand what a actual offset is. So even though regulations say you get up to $15 per unit, that depends on how much money NYCHA actually gets. So if NYCHA only gets the equivalent of $12 per unit, then you will get a portion of that money. So those are the topics that I'm going to present to the group to go into more detail about. And hopefully the list will maybe be expanded or it may be contracted. Either way, that's what the group is going to talk about. And I'm expecting little fireworks. So.
Well, thank you for that, because one of the things that we've been hearing is that it's really important for tenant association presidents to feel empowered and that they can use the regulations and that everyone is on the same page for understanding what it means, how they're to be used. And I've heard sometimes, when you call up to NYCHA to say, what does this mean? You can get 20 different answers depending on who you talk to. So it would be really good to have a standardized understanding, and we're grateful that HUD is stepping in to help level set
We're going to be
whatever
working,
it means.
after the group comes up with the actual framework, we're going to work closely with Greg and actually Eva more than likely to schedule it out, because, NYCHA got a lot of stuff going on. But we have to figure out a way to schedule it in so that we can roll it out to NYCHA, then get to the resident councils.
Right.
One of the comments that we had at the meeting that really helped those 5 presidents understand the magnitude of their role, one of them was dealing with a space concern. And, they told me, we need space. So, obviously I pulled up and I didn't see any vacant units in that particular place. So I said, you want space. The manager is saying that we don't have space. You want to invoke your, rights under 964 to get space. Well, you have to have a tenant meeting. And at that tenant meeting, you, as the resident council speaking on behalf of all of the residents, have to vote to tell NYCHA to make a hard decision. Give you space at the next vacant unit or don't house a family. It's not a decision NYCHA needs to make. The resident council wants the space. If the tenants really feel that passionate about needing that space, the tenant needs to show that, hey, we know as a tenant group, we may not be able to house somebody. And while we have to take that hit because we know we can't help that family, we believe that this space will help the larger community. So that's a vote that they did not even understand that they needed to take, because that's the power that is invested in them. They have to make these decisions, and these decisions will have consequences for somebody down the road. So a lot of the presidents really was like floored when we told them about that. But it's a hard decision, because you're asking a property manager not to house somebody. You have to show that the residents agree with that decision.
For one of the things I know that came out in that discussion was, in one of the developments, there was an empty store for 10 years.
Right. I forgot the name of the development.
Yeah, I don't have my notes with me, but it had been vacant for 10 years. And why couldn't that serve as the space for the association? But it still requires the association to say that it wants space.
Right, to acknowledge, hey, even though we have not had this revenue for 10 years, we're going to permanently block the ability to get that revenue for the foreseeable future.
And that was retail space owned by NYCHA?
Yeah, retail space. Right.
Mr. Hall, will you weigh in, please?
I like this topic, Mrs. Sherrod. You know I like this.
I know.
In any event, what I did not hear, and I'm concerned, if a resident association is a 501c3, where does that leave them as it lends itself to the HUD rules and regulations? And the reason I'm asking that is because what I'd like to know, is there an obligation on that particular association to have membership or to not have membership? Or can their bylaws restrict residents, if they do not want to join the organization, from joining the organization? Where do we stand as a non-for-profit versus a regular resident association as it lends itself to what I'm referring to?
On Thursday, we can have that topic, because that's why the bylaws were driven off of that specific topic.
Okay, all right. And
So that is actually a note
You're
that
not the
I have.
first one that's brought
no,
that up.
right,
So,
right.
yes, please.
And
add that.
what I do like is the fact that the last borough will be the Bronx, and they'll be waiting. But in any event, it's very interesting, and I understand you saying some presidents will be flawed. Many developments like to do repasses when folks pass away, and they're not able to get the centers, and it becomes problematic, which is why the association tries to pursue larger space, if in fact they have a studio apartment. And what you're saying is the residents per se, as a whole, need to indicate that getting a larger space is their best interest. Is that correct?
That's what they have to indicate to management.
Okay. All
It
right.
cannot be driven by the president by themselves.
That I understand.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
But it has to be resident driven.
All right. I mean, as we go along, because this is very interesting, and like I said, there's a lot of pros and cons. And another thing that I did not hear at all is MOU.
I'm not. Well, yeah, I actually have MOU.
Okay.
I actually have MOU. Apparently, I just went over it.
Okay, because
That's part of the relationship.
Yeah.
The relationship between NYCHA and the residents
Right.
is via the MOU.
Okay, because this was a major issue as it lends itself to TPA. I'm hoping it'll come out before the end of the year, but nevertheless, it's going to come out when it hits the Bronx. But I look forward to this, and I understand. We can agree to disagree, and it's okay. But we have to get this down pat. And there are several TA presidents ready, willing, and able. But those are the issues that I'm really looking forward to. And I can't go to the CCOP. Nevertheless, though, we'll talk.
We will be talking about that.
This is such an important topic. We're going to have a longer meeting on it on Thursday just to drill down on it. But I have seen all of the name cards for all of our resident association
Joel
presidents.
keeps going up and down.
So, Mr. Gross, did you want to weigh in? And then we'll go to Ms. Williams-Moore.
I would like to ask, since a lot of developments on NYCHA will go to the RAD Impact program, if they, after the conversion, they will still fall under the 964.
It's a different version of the 964 for the multifamily side, unless the RAD program includes public housing units. Then the 964 applies. So we have to look at the funding source to see which set of regulations applies. But overall, it will still have tenant rights. Just
So,
gotta-
yes.
Yeah.
Same
Right. You still will have tenant rights, regardless of the funding stream. They just don't convert then and say you don't have a right. It don't work like that.
Ms. Williams-Moore?
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So the question has come up on numerous occasions about universal bylaws. Is that something that we're talking about, you're talking about?
We can talk about it we can talk about it on Thursday if that's an idea we want to present to everybody, because you can create universal bylaws, but remember, every association is a reflection of their community. And while there are certain things that are standard in almost like every contract is almost standard, there's certain characteristics that are specific to that neighborhood that you want to respect to that neighborhood. So there can be certain provisions that are universal in general, but if you do things just a little bit different in Queens than they do in Brooklyn, and we know the Boogie Down does it different, so we got to give that deference to each individual. But yeah, that's a great idea.
And there's some basics that I assume should be in all the bylaws.
Every bylaw should have certain things because it's required under regulations.
Right.
Good, thank you. Did anyone else want to weigh in on that issue before we turn?
Just, so would you be preparing a model bylaw?
If you want me to,
Oh, I do.
you got it.
That's a good,
I'll add that to my notes.
that's a good idea.
That'd be great.
Thank you. And then we could even, if there may be, what comes out in your discussions, there may be things that you will hear where developments will want to have something additional, and maybe we can help draft bylaws that would be acceptable to accomplish those goals.
Good, thank you. Okay, now we'll turn it to Ms. Williams-Moore, please.
Thank you, Michelle. So NYCHA has numerous construction projects going on throughout the portfolio. Some of those construction projects are capital improvements, local law 11. We have Hurricane Sandy, which is the Recovery and Resiliency Program. The capital improvements program is pretty much based on the physical needs assessment. Okay, local law contracts are, DOB has the local law, thank you, local law 1998. And what that law specifies is that every high-rise building, 6 floors and above, have to be inspected. The facade has to be inspected every 5 years for public safety to ensure that there's no falling brick or any public hazard. And so once the inspectors go out, it's usually an engineer who goes out and inspects the buildings. Once they have their report together, they send their report back. If they report unsafe conditions, what then happens is a sidewalk shed goes up. Unfortunately, what happens with NYCHA is that NYCHA is unprepared for these inspections every 5 years, and so they don't have the budget allocated for these repairs to take place. And so what ends up happening is that these sidewalk sheds stay up for an extended amount of time, presenting safety hazards as we know. The other projects that we have are the Hurricane Sandy. That is the Recovery and Resiliency Program. That program entails, it actually has 35 NYCHA developments that were devastated by Hurricane Sandy. Those projects are in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. So the coordination of these projects, the stakeholders in these projects are the owners, the representatives. That would be NYCHA and its representatives, their CM contractors. It would be the resident associations, the residents, the contractors, and the project executives. So most of these projects are bid, build contracts. And so what happens is they say, okay, well, we need to have this design contract at, let's just say, any NYCHA development. And so they sit at the table, they decide we're going to build up something at, let's say, Williamsburg Houses. And so what happens is they go to the table, they design the contract, it goes out for bid, an architect bids on it, the architect wins the project. After the architect wins the project, he designs the project goes out for the contract bid. That's where the contractors come in, they bid on it. We know that it is based on the lowest bidder. Obviously, there's going to be qualifications involved as well. Not all the time the qualifications are being looked at, and that is a huge problem. Sometimes these contracts are given to contractors who don't have the ability to follow through with the contract. Sometimes these architects do not have the ability to design these contracts because, let's say, for instance, we're building on Williamsburg Houses. Well, Williamsburg Houses were built on tenements. And so we have structures underneath these developments. We have a lot of abandoned utilities underneath these structures. So before you start excavating in these projects, you're supposed to call 811. 811 then dispatches the utility companies. They come out, they do the markings. What happens sometimes is some utilities are missed. They are not marked. And so the contractor is not able to provide contract drawings that have GPR markouts, that is ground penetrating radar markouts, that actually show you, well, this is a water line. It runs from this point to that point. During excavation, what happens is when you don't have these markouts, the excavator sometimes hits these gas lines. When a gas line is hit, that's something major. Con Ed has to come out. After this gas line is hit, these guys are to remove themselves from that area, the immediate danger, because it's gas. It can blow, by any spark, fuse, or cigarette lit, or whatever have you. And 911 is supposed to be called. After 911 is called, the utility owner is dispatched to the scene, which in this case, it's going to be Con Ed because it's gas. Con Ed comes out immediately. In my experience, they've come out immediately. They've come out, they put a temporary fix, and then they go back to the table with the stakeholders for negotiations. Well, what happens is, if Con Ed deems that the gas needs to be turned off, well, guess what? We have a major problem. We have a major problem because those gas risers have not been changed in NYCHA for years, since these buildings have been built. So that's one thing that you definitely want to avoid. You want to avoid the gas going off. If Con Ed can do a temporary fix, that would be better. Then we can go back to the table. If further excavation needs to happen, we can do the further excavation. But what happens is also is that now we have to figure out who's going to pay for this. Who's going to pay for this? Does it go on the contractor because he did it? He created this accident? Or does it go on the owner of the property? That's something that has to be looked at as well. That's a major, major issue. Who's going to pay for this? So we all know you go to the store. What do people say? You break, you buy. That should transfer over into construction as well. If you broke it, you should fix it, and it should come out of your budget. Currently, I haven't seen too many instances where it comes out of the contractor's budget, but instead it comes out of NYCHA's budget. Why is that? Okay. So after the gas has been cut off, now we have to get a plumber. He has to file for permits. He has to wait for the approval from DOB. Once he waits for the approval, then they go in, they do the necessary repairs. Once the repairs have been made, then they will call DOB again and let DOB know that the repairs have been made. Con Ed will then be dispatched to the scene. They will come out. They will do an inspection themselves. It will be a visual inspection, and it would be a pressurized test. They will pressurize the system higher than the system will operate normally to see if the system can withstand the pressure. If at that time it fails, then we got to go back to the drawing board. But a lot of times what happens is the risers or the valves or whatever have you, they may need to be changed. A lot of times the pipes are behind the walls. If the pipes are behind the walls, then it poses another problem. There has to be some coordination with the residents. Now we need access to the resident's apartment. If the residents aren't home, guess what? No gas is going on. It doesn't matter if we do the entire building. If 2 residents aren't home, no one gets gas. That's a major, major issue. But obviously everyone knows at this table with NYCHA, if you are not home, they will drill out your locks. A lot of people have a problem with that. You're invading their privacy. So that's construction. That's construction. That's construction.
Destruction.
It is, and you have to destruct in order to construct.
I like that. Thank you.
So, well, one thing, and we could do this offline, but sit down and go through that timeline and then see where we could have some impact on it. And we could do that with NYCHA. And let's figure out where, I know I have heard a lot about the fact that because they put higher pressure in to test it, that they find all the weak spots, which normally they would not be finding because the pressure never gets that high. But you know, these are major safety issues, so we have to learn a little bit more about it. But the way to do it, let's take each segment and go through it.
Okay.
Thank you for that, because you bring unique perspective, being both the Tenant Association president, being a NYCHA resident, and also having deep construction expertise in your own background. So we appreciate your educating us all, and hopefully we can help, as Bart said, find ways that we can add value in the process to help eliminate some of the procedural gaps that exist. Thank you for that. Thank you. Would anyone else like to weigh in before we move on?
The only other thing I would say is that with scaffolding and the sheds, local law 11, of course, is a major issue. And we are, I think as many of you know, we are looking for ways that NYCHA may be able to accomplish some of the inspections without putting up the scaffolding and the sheds. And we've started with drones as one way. It's not by any means a complete solution. It's also some assistance in doing budgeting using drones. But the reason there are so many, it's not just NYCHA, but there's so many sheds and scaffolding around the city, is that it's cheaper to pay for the scaffolding than to fix the property. And because it's every 5 years that you have to inspect, if the scaffolding is up for a few years, it doesn't pay to take it down and then put it up again, because the most expensive part of all of this is the construction of the scaffolding and the sheds. So it really needs we can do some things about it, I think. Then it's probably up to the city council at some point to take a look at local law 11 and what is it accomplishing, or what is it creating, and what are the cost benefit analysis. But for the time being, we have to look for things we can do and live with local law 11.
In addition to the scaffolding issue, another issue that you hit upon that I hear a lot when I'm talking to residents are different outages because of the construction projects, like you said. For whatever reason, this gas line was hit, then the gas is out, and that coordination between the gas company and the building and the management really needs to be improved. So that's another point that comes up so often in these construction projects that really impact residents in a negative way.
Yep.
So thank you for highlighting that. Okay, first I'm going to turn to Mr. Hall to weigh in on the question, and then if you go ahead.
I just want to go back to the situation regarding the rises. I just had that in Gun Hill. We had one line that was out, and we were blessed because we were able to satisfy the situation with the manager, meeting with them every week, and it was done before Thanksgiving. Okay. But I put the bag out because I thought the folks they only had the hot plate. And it's very embarrassing, especially with Thanksgiving upcoming. But we were able to sideswipe that. But we have a couple of developments that is very bad. I think Sackworm was one of them. They haven't been out for quite some time, and they've gotten together and created protests. I've seen them myself on News 12. I don't know what NYCHA does with regards to issues of that magnitude. All right. People want to be heard. Residents want to be heard. They get together. They're not familiar with press conferences and things of that nature. They're shy, but yet and still, the pipes and the rises themselves, if they go out into the street, there seems to be a difference. One is more expenditures than another, and it's very problematic, really, when it comes to the residents. So I sincerely hope that NYCHA takes a good look at this as some of the older developments, all right, and play their problems. It's important.
So a lot of times what the problem is that a plumber needs to be involved in this. They're pipes. And if the plumber doesn't put in the necessary paperwork with DOB for permits and things of that sort, everything is going to be delayed. And so what we have to do is we have to start looking at DOB website. When we know that there's a gas outage in a building, we have to go to DOB's website, we have to type in our addresses, and we have to see whether those permits have been filed. If those permits haven't been filed, we need to start there.
Spell it.
SACK/WERN.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. It's next to Soundview.
And Ms. Stein, this is an important issue, so we appreciate that the mayor's office is really weighing in on all of the issues, because this really calls for a lot of interagency cooperation. So,
So another issue that we have heard regarding this is also the need for utilities to actually come and respond. Has that been one of the issues also that has caused a significant delay?
So when there's an emergency, like if we break the gas line right now, as of today, they come immediately.
Right.
But to get them back out to do the necessary repair, that is what takes time. So having them at the table, it takes time. Sometimes you got to get them on a schedule. People don't have availability. And getting them out to do the necessary work. Sometimes materials need to be ordered. Who's ordering the materials? Who's paying for that? Con Ed may have specified means and methods in which they want you to prepare this land for them to come in and to do the pipe. I've heard requests, Con Ed requests saying, you know, we want a bed of sand, and then we want a blanket, and we want all of these things. And then you have these contractors scrambling to find out, where is that in the rules? Where is that in the law? Where is that in the regulations? Can we find that somewhere? So a lot of times there's a lot of miscommunication because one agency wants one thing, but another agency feels like that's not necessary. So actually coming to the table and getting all of the coordination together, yeah, sometimes it takes time.
One of the things that I've discussed with the mayor's office, and I'm going to return to it after this discussion today, is that I think that every mayoral agency should have at least one senior person who has NYCHA in his or her portfolio, and that it also should include the utilities, so that at least everyone knows who to call when there is an issue. I'm not suggesting hiring new people or anything like that. Just designate someone that is the NYCHA person.
For an interagency task force.
Right.
Thank you again for that, Ms. Moore, Mr. Williams-Moore. Now I'd like to switch topics and focus on Mr. Joel Gross, who has been looking at the issue related to leases and residents' rights and recertifications to some extent as well. I know you've been working with our other CAC member, Nancy Ortiz, on that, but if you could give us a presentation on the types of things that you've been thinking about.
Good evening. My name is Mr. Gross. I'm a resident, 20 years in public housing in NYCHA. I'm the TA president for Williams Plaza Houses. I'm also a community board member in Brooklyn, #1 on public housing. So I would like to talk about our topic, what's going to benefit the resident and the management. When a resident right now goes to the management office requesting to add somebody to the lease, usually the residents will speak to a housing assistant. The housing assistants will come up with a list on documentation, what is required, and also application. Then the residents come back, they find out, they speak to different housing assistants, they find out some documents what the first housing assistant was not mentioning is missing. So I'm working right now with Mr. Schwartz and his team. With NYCHA should come up with a instruction sheet. If somebody walks into the office, they want to add a family member. This family member has to be a blood relative, have all instructions, all the documentations, like in a checklist. So if the tenant walks out to the office, he knows exactly what to bring. When he comes back to the office, he has all the documentations. He has already filled out application. The other topic has to be like a time frame. Anything from NYCHA, remove a family member, add a family member. Even if somebody goes into NYCHA, let's say, they say, NYCHA, you miscalculate my rent. My rent went up double, mistake, you put in double. Any human error can happen in NYCHA to everybody. So the only problem is time frame. How long is going to get for NYCHA to address the issue? How long is going to take NYCHA to address if the permission request or the temporary permission request is approved or not approved? So I think the best it will be very positive in production if we have an instruction sheet done, and we have a checklist on the structure sheet done, attached application, so so that the residents know exactly what to bring and to fill out. And we should have like a time frame for like 30 days, approve it or disapprove it. I know after any single resident that want to be at a NYCHA above 16 have to go to a criminal background check. That can take 2-3 days, but usually it should be approved by 2 weeks, most of the time like 30 days. A lot of times you hear from people they're waiting 6 months, 9 months, even over a year. And also, I think it will be very positive. I think if we have like a supervisor hotline, if a resident feels after a month or weeks went by, they put in a request to remove a family member, to add a family member, or even adjusting just the income, just a rent adjustment. If they went by, let's say, 2 months, no response from NYCHA, they should have ability to just hang up, call a supervisor, to email, communicate with somebody above management to make sure the issues is getting addressed.
Yeah, you make two really good points, though. Just having a protocol and just set instructions on what do you need, so that both the resident knows and the management office knows what documentation should be there, where the holes are, and it can do it in a timely fashion.
You see a lot of times residents going back and forth multiple times to the office. It's frustrating for the tenants. The house assistant says you're coming every other day to the office. Once you have it on a paper, black and white, it's going to be easier for everybody.
Right.
And also about other topic, NYCHA has, the last couple of years, they have a rule. If somebody lives in a one-bedroom apartment, they're not allowed to add nobody in. I think Letitia James, the Attorney General today, when she was public advocate, I think she files a lawsuit about that particular topic for violating, because usually a senior citizen, let's say from the 70s, 80s, they want to add in the daughter to the lease, live with her for the next 10, 15 years. We see it a lot of in NYCHA. We have a lot of senior citizens in our development. A lot of the citizen needs to have a family member to live with them, to assist them. A lot of times, NYCHA, most of the times, NYCHA will refuse because according right now to the policy, if one person lives in a one-bedroom apartment, they're unable to add in nobody, even like 2 females. And what's happened right now, NYCHA's losing 10, 15 years of on rent from the door, like somebody's child living can assist the senior citizen. And the senior citizen has a lot of time have problems. The kids will refuse to come live because they don't want to live with not being on the lease. They don't want to live illegal over there. So I think for senior citizen rights, for reasonable accommodation, a senior citizen should be allowed to add like a family member to the lease to assist them. That's going to benefit the senior citizen. It's going to benefit NYCHA to collect rent. And according to Section 8 protocol, Section 8 allows even one bedroom to add in a family member.
So that's a NYCHA issue, not a HUD issue?
Yeah.
No, it's a HUD issue as well. It's nuanced. So in a elderly development that has been designated as elderly, NYCHA will lose that designation if it allows a non-elderly person to occupy a unit.
I'm not talking about senior citizen development, regular NYCHA.
So now in a regular unit,
Yes.
that's not elderly.
No.
The occupancy standards have to say what they are, but reasonable accommodation will override that occupancy standard temporarily. So they can bring in somebody, but they may be required to move afterwards. So if they need a temporary person to bring in long term, NYCHA may be able to allow them to come in, but then NYCHA can say you can't stay in this unit because it is not part of the occupancy standard. You will have to move to a different size unit. So NYCHA has that. We have to look at NYCHA's policies to see what their reasonable accommodation policy, which overrides their what's called the annual, it's called the admissions and continued occupancy policy, ACOP. The reasonable accommodation will override that. But we have to see to make sure that NYCHA's both policies are up to date. And if it's not, NYCHA goes through the process to update them and then allows those reasonable accommodations to happen, but it may come with the caveat that they have to transfer to another unit. Because the occupancy standards are whatever the local law says and NYCHA has adopted. So that's, I don't know that part of the complaint, but the part where a reasonable accommodation can happen is allowed under federal law. In fact, is required. So if they have the proper documentation, a knowledgeable medical provider says that they need to be have a live-in aid. That's what it's called. Yeah. Being a live-in aid can move in. Now, if they just want to add their daughter to the lease without a reasonable accommodation, they have to go through NYCHA's regular policy, and in that case, it may not be allowed. The reason why some residents choose to not use the reasonable accommodation method is the live-in aid has no residual rights to the unit. So if that requester were to leave the unit for any reason, the person that's the live-in aid has to leave with them. Yeah. So a lot of residents don't want to do that, and that's the main reason, because once you add a live-in aid to your lease, your rent doesn't go up. Live-in aid's income is not counted toward the family income, but that comes with the caveat that once the requester has left the unit for any reason, that live-in aid have to move. And in NYCHA, that is a really big burden for a really big pill for some tenants to swallow, because they don't want to see their daughter homeless if something unfortunate happens to them or any family member. So that's a decision the family has to make on how they want to accommodate that. So looking at NYCHA's policies, we can, and I'll help you, we can work on looking at their policies, make sure that they're up to date, and they reflect NYCHA's current standards, because NYCHA has changed over the years, and if the policy hasn't been updated since the 90s, then, obviously, it's probably going through the update process now. But the reasonable accommodation is legit, but people need to understand that if they add their child after they've got a knowledgeable medical provider to verify the need of a live-in aid, that live-in aid has zero residual rights to that unit. And that's a battle that a lot of residents have to fight, because if the person that requested leaves the unit, that person after them immediately has to leave.
I mean, no succession rights.
No succession rights. And there's been a couple of news stories, unfortunately, in the New York area, where that rule has come into effect, and it is a terribly heartless rule, but it is the rule, and that's what people have to follow. So, but we can work on that. If you add me to you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for offering to work together on that, because I know NYCHA is going through looking at the policies and updating them. And I see your tent card up, Eva Trimble, who's the NYCHA Executive Vice President for Strategy and Innovation for the Office of the Chair at NYCHA. So please weigh in.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Gross, for bringing this to the committee today. These are two issues that I wasn't completely aware of. I know that the time frame for processing annual reviews and rent calculations is longer than it should be. So that one was on my list, but the other nuances were not. So this is very helpful information as we begin to review all of our policies and procedures, but also as we begin to review, as part of the organizational plan, what the property management structure is at the sites and what all of the different staff within a property do every day. So from housing assistant to caretaker, this is something that's been on our list as well, as far as the housing assistants having a very broad set of duties, from what you say here to rent collection to housing court to to other responsibilities that maybe we need to reevaluate. So this is very helpful as we start to think about it. And then I am very interested in looking at now our subsidy standard and the ACOP as well, because I agree. I think our subsidy standard should be aligned between Section 8 and public housing. I'm sure there were valid reasons for setting it up the way it's set up right now, but it's worth exploring. And Sherrod, you are a master of clarifying all these nuances in a way I've never seen before. So thank you.
And Eva, while you have the floor, if you wanted to continue with any other remarks.
Sure. The only other update I was going to say was, as mentioned earlier, was just to highlight some of the improvements on our heat, since that's the topic du jour for sure. And we are very close, I think, now to, I think we're imminent for having a heat action plan finalized. So we're very excited about that. I think it shows tremendous progress that the team has made at NYCHA, starting over the summer to do all the prep work for the season, as well as what we've been doing kind of all hands on deck now with heat season on us. So between 2017 and 2019, we've had tremendous progress. And so the number of outages has decreased 63%. So at this point in the year, in 2017, there were 512 incidents of heat outages. So far to date this year, at the same time frame, we've only had 188 incidences. So it's a 63% decrease. It's tremendous. And more importantly, I think, is the time of those outages has decreased from 42 hours on average in 2017 to 9 hours on average in 2019. So we still definitely have a lot more to go to get there, but we're understanding that we have, very aged infrastructure, and so things will always happen, but we are putting in place the response that's needed to address that as soon as possible.
That's good to hear.
The only thing I would add to that, you're right, or not to add, but highlight, is that we are very close to completing the heat action plan. But as I've said in other meetings and in other meetings of this group, that the fact that the action plan isn't in place doesn't mean that action hasn't been taking place. There's a lot has been going on. The action plan is something that is essentially going to be a contract to NYCHA, to the residents. Here's what we're going to accomplish and how we're going to do it. That's a very detailed document, but still an enormous amount of work was done preparing for the season and to the working with the outages that have existed. And we've been sending our investigators out to the outages as well, and talking to residents and generally trying to figure out what's going on and what happened. And we're joining NYCHA's weekly review of the outages to see what can be learned from them, and we're participating in that and adding what we learned to those meetings.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Hall, I want to acknowledge you so that you can weigh in on this issue and then also segue into your issue, please, which relates to the consolidations. So thank you, Resident Association President Robert Hall, if you will please give us a presentation.
Okay. I just wanted to touch base with the heat situation because I have a development that has 732 units, and I have 4 boilers. Now, out of the 4 boilers, at this precise moment, only one is working. When only one of the boilers work, it has trouble getting the heat up to the 14th floor. I have 6 14th floor buildings. And I've just learned this because I had an honest conversation with my new superintendent. And I must give him a lot of credit because he showed up at the meeting and folks didn't have heat over the weekend. Nothing goes wrong until Friday night. As soon as everyone goes home, this is what happens. But he manned up and he said, I am very sorry. And it's my understanding as we speak right now, whatever part was needed to fix the second boiler has already been there. There's a situation regarding the plumbers, whoever fixed this. And it's supposed to be taken care of. But as we speak, Gun Hill Houses has 1 boiler working. And the heat is in the pipe, but it doesn't get to the radiator. So you may be hearing things of that nature. But it's not considered an outage, you see? But yet and still, it is an outage. So, it's like 6 in one, half a dozen the other. When I hear outages, I know there's an in-between, and there's always an in-between. Same thing with the rises. There's always something in between, and this is what happens and it falls through the cracks, all right? Well,
because if you have residents that can show you as a resident president work orders that they put in for
that's
heat
what
loss.
I do. That's what I do.
We are requiring NYCHA to track heat loss by unit as well.
Right.
So we can have that matrix is in the agreement. So you may not be an outage, but we do track heat loss
right.
in individual units. So that's a complaint that has to be generated up,
Right.
so we can go look at it. So I appreciate you putting it on my radar.
Yeah.
So we can ask Eva to have them run a test to see how many, it's actually called heat loss, units by heat loss.
Precisely.
So we can look into that to make
Yeah.
sure that it's not being overlooked. So
Yeah, this
thank you
is,
for letting
and
us know.
it's unique because we're not freezing, but we're not right. And this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying what I'm saying.
But when you see that heat action plan, it literally takes that into account.
All right.
And we
Okay.
need to elevate the repair of the second boiler, or one of the,
Exactly.
because God forbid, the one that is working goes out, whatever's holding up that part.
But there has to be some humongous boilers.
No,
Yeah, it's a big one.
I'm aware of
Big
it.
mamas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
one of the things we're tracking too from the monitors team is both the heat outages, as Bart said, but also the heat loss complaints.
Right.
And so we're encouraging all the tenant association presidents to encourage your residents
To put the
those orders in.
and for the most part, we all know that's our obligation. And I tell my residents, do not talk to me until you have a ticket number. Then we can talk. All right. But it's gospel, and I fully understand that, and it helps alleviate the situation and make it plain and simple. All right. So now I'm going to continue and go into consolidation. All right. I'd say about 11 years ago, 13 years to be exact, all right, Gun Hill Houses was consolidated, all right? It was consolidated with another development, which was, I'm a community board chair for the housing, and I'm going to say it's about 7 blocks away from the facility itself. So we had Parkside on AD Avenue, and 7 blocks over was Gun Hill. And they called us a consolidated development. And it wreaked havoc. And this havoc remained for 11 years. And when I came to meetings, I used to say that my name was Robert Hall, and I think I'm from Gun Hill. However, they want to call me Parkside Consolidated for whatever reason whatsoever. And there was a gentleman that heard me. He said I was professional about my complaint. And he looked into this, and he came to the Bronx, and he came to Gun Hill. It was 95 degrees. It was 11 a.m., and I'll never forget this day. And he called me. He says, well, where are you? And I said, I'm in Parkside. And he walked. He looked around, and he walked. And when he got into the lunchroom, he was soaking wet. So then I went right into my thing, and I told him, this is man's inhumanity to mankind. I gave him every lecture, every scenario. And I said, you took my history away. All right? And the reason I said that, my mother was a TA president. But the fact of the matter was, you cannot consolidate 2 developments that are that far apart and think you are going to be beneficial in the best interest of residents. Not all residents are senior orientated. Some developments have a lot of seniors, but they're not a senior development. That happens a lot. And if you look at the stats, you begin to see that. I began to see my residents having to make a decision whether to get on a bus to go to Parkside to see their housing assistant. And I'm glad I'm getting this after what was just said, because they used to go to see the housing assistant, and the housing assistant was not at her desk in Parkside because she was walking around in Gun Hill looking at air conditioners, looking at window guards, all right? And, it was disastrous, all right? And like I said, and I've said it to a lot of news media, I said, I have 3 caretakers, and I have 6 14-story buildings, and I have a supervisor caretakers, and I have no one else in this development. And they call this a consolidation. And I told them it was man's inhumanity to mankind. And this went on for 11 years, but this gentleman, and he's no longer with NYCHA, and I don't want to mention his name, but he's gone. But He was the one, he came and he told me, I am very sorry for interrupting your history. And what he did, he created this deconsolidation. And everybody made fun of that because I coined the word because that's what I called myself. But they had to make a decision which property was to be deconsolidated. All right. There were 3 consolidated developments in the Bronx. So they got rid of Gun Hill. Thank God for that. All right. But the way they did it, they notified the staff of the decision. Operations does this. They identify the office space of the development. All right. This is what's done. The borough office submits the IT needs, the staffing plans, and the relocation of tenant files to the new location. All right. Now, 2 days after the staff notifications, they advise intergovernmental of the deconsolidation. This is the process that they have. All right. After that is done, that's when they begin to notify the residents by placing notices under the doors in the buildings and the offices, letting them know that they're going to deconsolidate. A lot of residents don't understand what that means. All they know is management is 6 blocks away, all right? So they continue going back and forth, all right? It's quite problematic, all right? And the process that they utilize to deconsolidate, it took longer than one would really expect. But nevertheless, it was great to see. After they notify the residents by placing notices under the doors, that's when they contact CAC and the tenant association. That is done by resident engagement. All right. It's an amazing thing. All right. I feel very bad because I'm now deconsolidated, but I have a small staff. All right. Some of the good that consolidations are supposed to bring are better resident services. That becomes a question mark if the location is too far apart. All right? Direct access to systemic problems, because if there is a large problem, it's obvious because the whole personality, all the personnel are involved. All right? Some of the bad problems is extra funding, all right, for materials, and also additional staff becomes questionable, all right? But above all, one of the worst problems has just been discussed, and that's the problems with the housing assistance. They have the arduous job of listening to leases, trying to redirect payments to people who were working and now they're not working anymore, and you have to readjust their rent. And then, like I said, they're walking around, they're looking at air conditioners, they're looking at window guards, and there's no time frame for anything. So you cannot find the personnel or the personalities. And God forbid there's any type of outage, because everything gets redirected and there's no time frame. All right. The other 2 developments are Morris Senior Air Rights and Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson happens to be the home of Danny Barber, who's the citywide cop chair. All right. And that is a lot of work. It's a lot. I've spoken to Danny Barber with regards to this, and he told me, he said, listen, they want to do this, that, and the other. It's too much of an urbanized area. They can't relocate the garbage. They want to build in the parking lot. And notice I said build. The question is, what are they going to build? The answer, they want to build a mental health facility. But they didn't say that originally. But that's the direction things are going in. And they're trying to do a lot of segue as it lends itself to the garbage issue. All right, I spoke to the other president, Cheney, last night, and I said I'm going to do the best I can. Not that I'm trying to make a change, but these are they're very difficult issues that affect the ebb and flow of these developments. I don't know what is going to happen in that particular instance. All right, the last consolidated development is Forest Houses and McKinley Houses. And historically, there's not a love between the two. You know, and it's very sad. Now, I don't say that in every instance you need to do a density study. But when you have people shooting at each other, it's not in the best interest to consolidate. But I'm not here for, public safety. He is. There's the chief. But yet and still, these are concerns that are magnanimous, and basically it is what it is. I don't say, well, look, let's reconsider, but you have to take all these mitigating factors into consideration, and folks need to be more transparency to be heard. And I know these are big moves, but I think if there were more transparency, it would be looked at from another direction. And that's it. I'm very fortunate in many regards, and I got a long way to go. And personnel changes. There are a lot of experienced housing assistants, but they're going to retire. You know what you got, but you don't know what's coming in. And this is something you really have to be cognizant of. And it's something that what it does in order to really restore the faith that divides the residents between NYCHA itself, clear and precise transparency that's needed. And that's where Greg Russ comes in, and I see that in him. And I'm very happy that he promotes dialogue with any and everyone, even people who adversely approach him. He turns it around and makes them his best friend. So that's a good thing. And that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hall.
You're welcome.
You bring a unique perspective, having been your own Gun Hill and then being consolidated for 11 years and then going through the process of deconsolidation. And of course, as you hit, there are pros, there are cons, but having it be really well thought out with all of the intricacies and unique issues that affect each of the development, and making sure that no one feels like they're being ignored or forgotten about because the office has moved to a particular location.
Definitely.
Is critical. I've gone to a lot of consolidated developments, and you do hear that concern that the housing assistant might have office hours in that particular building, but are they consistent? Are they posted? Are they actually there on Tuesday and Thursday like they say they will be? And all of those other things that are the important things for the lives of the residents, so that they're not trudging 11 blocks to another development to do their lease recertification. So thank you for highlighting that.
You're welcome.
And Eva, would you like to weigh in, please?
Yes, I just wanted to let you know that as part of our organizational planning work, we are looking at the current state of consolidations as well as the management structure from there on up. And so this is something that, we're taking very seriously to think about how are we, managing from the property manager up to the RAM, and is it the right structure right now? Do we have the right consolidations? Do we need less? Do we need more? But also, do we have the right number of regional asset managers? Is there another structure that should be in place? So this is all, everything you're saying is exactly what we're evaluating right now as part of the organizational plan. And as kind of Bart alluded to, it's not just a new chart. It's really looking at every aspect of how we operate and rethinking it.
No.
So.
All right.
That's good to hear.
Thank you.
Sherrod, would you weigh in, please?
I'm going to add to what Eva was saying, but I'm going to take it from a resident engagement standpoint. NYCHA is working on everything that Eva just mentioned. When it's time to talk with the resident presidents and the residents in general, one of the factors that they have to look at that HUD mandates is what's called asset managed properties. And we want each development to be able to stand on its own financially or be grouped in a manner that will allow it to financially be viable. At that conversation, some developments may find out that due to circumstances beyond residents' control, sometimes beyond NYCHA control, or causes beyond NYCHA control, while they want that history to be maintained, they can't afford it. They don't have enough revenue coming in to cover the expenses. Remember, NYCHA has some of the oldest stock in the country. So while preserving that history through the resident engagement part is important, and knowing that, you know, development A and development B don't like each other and they tend to fight each other, that hard conversation for the residents to have with NYCHA is forthcoming in this transparency push that we're having NYCHA to do. So I want all the residents to be prepared to hear that hard information and then be able to say, you know, realistically and reasonably to NYCHA, hey, look, we understand that our development is not financially viable. We can't really get along with development B over there. What are other opportunities that we could explore to consolidate somewhere else? Because it's not a matter of can you consolidate or can you not consolidate. It's what is the best consolidation. And maybe in that consolidation, you still keep your history. You know, they may keep the different names, but when they report it up to HUD, it may be something that they report to HUD that the tenants don't necessarily see directly, but we see, so that you can keep your, you know, Gunder Hill, you know, Parkside different histories, but that conversation was had, and every resident now understands that not only are we looking at the social aspects, but it's a definite financial aspect to it as well. Because if Gunder Hill can't survive financially, what do we do?
Yeah. Which is why I always tell residents the little variables, pay your rent. Bottom line. But I understand that fact. I get it.
Ms. Williams-Moore, did you want to briefly weigh in on that? What was there an issue?
No, I just wanted to touch on something else. Actually, I'm sorry to go backwards on everyone. I just wanted to, because I know that there's a lot of residents that are going to be looking at this as well. And I know that the residents have been concerned with the sidewalk shed. What I want to say to the residents is, if you want the sidewalk shed put down, there is something that you can do as well. Make sure that you have an AC bracket. That is something that is in the system. You can go in and you can see the violations as far as the buildings go, and NYCHA does know that. NYCHA is aware that a lot of residents do not have AC brackets, and it prevents DOB from signing off to have that bridge dismantled. So I just wanted to bring it back to that so that we can also empower the residents.
I'm going to need to move on. I wanted to shift issues to give the floor, please, to NYPD Housing Chief Capucci. If you would please say a few words, and if you could bring that mic closer to you, please.
Well, thank you, Asha. This being the first time here, obviously I have no follow-up or updates, but I will try to, I guess, just paint the picture, public safety, and it's a pretty good picture. First, I would agree with you. Forrest and McKinley, you might as well call them Hatfield and McCoys on my level, so they don't get along. That being said, I don't know nothing about this consolidation, but that one street divides them. It's not enough. It's bad. And any young kid, so it's a shame. But we're trying. Housing, obviously our mission, provide safety and security to the residents of NYCHA, just like any other resident of New York City, right? We try to provide services besides the obvious arrest when they violate, give victims some help. We try to give them the quality of life that every resident of New York City expects. Like, just because you live in NYCHA, you shouldn't expect any less, and you should get the same quality of life that everyone else gets. And that's not just a saying for us, because our chief pushes this down to all the PSAs. And Chief Secretary loves to say, born and raised in NYCHA, and he still has a heart in NYCHA. He's born in Albany Houses in Brooklyn. So all 9 PSAs, all our police officers truly believe, and rightfully so, that besides the police work, and that's the same throughout the city, crime's an all-time low, we're doing great numbers. Services and just quality of life every day for people to come out in NYCHA should be the same as the other 8 million people that live in New York City. So that being said, if you guys want to touch on a couple things that you said, Bart, lighting, obviously, lighting is a big deal for us. The more we could light up, and we see a big improvement. We do see a lot of lighting getting better. We had temporary lighting through a MAP program for a while, and that's becoming permanent lighting, so it is getting better. Those scaffolding and shedding, for years now, I've been in housing a long time. I was a CO 10 years ago. It is a serious problem. You can put all the lighting up you want. We have 17,000 cameras. and there's still a spot under that scaffolding where they're going to congregate to wait for victims, wait for seniors, hang out and smoke, hang out and do whatever, and we just can't see it. It is a huge problem. I understand the law. I don't understand as far as being a lawyer, but I know nothing could be done because it's this law. We've been fighting to get the scaffolding done. We did a survey. Every CO went on and pretty much just measured how much they have years ago, and it's still up there. So anything that can be done to take that down, that would be a game changer for us. And we have 17,000 cameras. That they're a game changer. NYCHA is constantly adding cameras through funding, however they get them, so that's a good thing for us. We have a great relationship with NYCHA. Obviously, their head of security is a retired NYPD, Jerry Nelson. So I talk to him probably more than I talk to my wife. He calls me 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. You know, so weekends, he's fantastic. If we need something and if he needs something, he has no problem calling me and we get it done. So the relationship is good. You know, safety-wise, you know, I don't want to say last year was our best record, you know, best numbers when it comes to shooting and homicides. Because when I say 42 people were killed, it's not a great number. We want it to be 0. That being said, it was the lowest number since '95. This year, if you figure out last year was the best, we're going to be really bad. We're like number 2 best year in shootings and just number 3 in the homicides. Again, I don't want anyone thinking, wow, 42 and he's happy. We're not happy with that. But if you look back in '95, you're talking triple digits in both of those. So we're going in the right direction. We're fully in, just like the rest of the city, with neighborhood policing. Every development has neighborhood coordinating officers. We're trying to build those bridges with the community, just like every other resident with their precincts. Every PSA, every district, every precinct has this. We're fully engaged in it. If you saw the new police commissioner, right, Dermot Shea, it's not going anywhere. You speak transparency, we're in the same boat. Body cameras, transparency, building bridges. It's a work in progress. I'm not saying it's great right now, but I've seen it get a lot better over the last 10 years just in housing. So I think we're going in the right direction, and we're just going to keep working at it. So if I have any questions, I can answer them. Like I said, I don't know what to expect as far as what you wanted from me, but.
Mr. Gross?
About the sidewalk chat, I was having the same issue in my development, where I come up with a plan to, number 1, to make sure where is a camera, we was changing the wood, blocking it with just plain plastic or with a screen, a net, and also the same thing about the light. So I think the TA president should be in touch to make sure they have the lights all over, and also where you have cameras, make sure it's not blocked. They can replace it with a plastic frame or even with a net.
Yeah, we've experimented, well, not me, NYCHA has experimented with different color netting, different color lighting, and we're all for it. Whatever makes it better. That shedding and that scaffolding is tough. It's tough.
Well, thank you, Chief Capucci, and we appreciate you being here on our committee. In these last 3 minutes, I actually do want to just turn attention to the last 3 people at the end of the table and acknowledge and thank you for being here. We have NYCHA Resident Engagement Department Manager Denise Guess at the end of the table, and we have on this side of the table, we have Darrell Rattray, who is the DYCD Associate Commissioner. Thank you for being here. And we have a guest filling in for Suzanne Michaelburst. We have the DIFTA Deputy Director of Public Affairs, Luella Byers. Thank you also for being here, and we hope that you all have heard things that you could take back to your respective agencies. And in the last minute, though, I wanted to open the floor if any of the 3 of you wanted to weigh in briefly.
I'll take 30 seconds.
Okay, please.
No, because when JT was speaking and then Haley went into discussions around the work being done with the MOU, I said, well, I should give a quick history of the MOU. So DYC actually had an MOU with NYCHA from 2010 through 2015. During that time, we did do a renewal. Part of the provisions of that MOU was that NYCHA was to do all the repairs. Also, what changed during that period of time was originally NYCHA did the cleaning for the centers. So our providers occupied the centers, operated programming, NYCHA caretakers will come in and do cleaning. The issue with that, and I think this is a great relationship we have with our providers and UNH members, is that we found that our programs are operating from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. after school programming. The caretakers, they're leaving at 4:30 because of the union contract. So we actually shifted funding to the providers to provide the cleaning services. So that's sort of the evolution. MOU expired in 2015. We still operate under the provisions of that MOU and the spirit of that MOU. So while it's expired, NYCHA still completes all the repairs. We've been working closely again with our providers to escalate any outstanding repairs, any major repairs that could give them a violation or a DOHMH citing. But yeah, we're working closely with NYCHA, daily communication with other city agencies. So.
Thank you. And thank you for that history. At this time, I'm going to turn it back to you, Bart, if you will close us out, please.
Sure. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone around the table. This really was a very good discussion, and more than a discussion. It's given us follow-up assignments to do and to report back at the next meeting. So and to those who are listening and watching, I appreciate your participating. And again, the Monitor website is NYCHAmonitor.com. If you have any information about lighting or anything else you'd like to tell us about, that's the best way to reach us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.